There is a story we tell ourselves. It is the oldest story. It goes like this. We are exceptional. We are adaptable. We conquered the oceans, the poles, the stratosphere. We will conquer the void. This story is a lie built on a misunderstanding of what we actually are. The human brain is not a general-purpose instrument. It is not a universal machine capable of operating in any environment you care to drop it into. It is a specialized organ, 1.4 kilograms of electrochemical tissue shaped over 400 million years by a single highly specific planetary address, Earth. Latitude variable, altitude variable, but always Earth. The brain did not evolve for ambition, it evolved for survival on a thin strip of bioavailable surface wrapped around a medium-sized rock orbiting a minor star at precisely the right distance to sustain liquid water. Every neural circuit you possess, every reflex, every perception, every emotion you have ever experienced was calibrated for that address and only that address. Consider what the terrestrial brain requires just to remain stable. It requires a horizon, a real one, not a screen, not a simulated curve. The human vestibular system, the inner ear, the proprioceptive network distributed across your muscles and joints, these systems use the horizon as a constant reference point. They use it to know where up is, to know where you are. Remove the horizon, and the brain begins to argue with itself about the nature of physical reality. It requires a 24-hour light cycle. The suprachiasmatic nucleus, a cluster of roughly 20,000 neurons sitting just above the optic chiasm, has been synchronizing human biology to the rotation of this planet for hundreds of thousands of years. Cortisol, melatonin, serotonin, insulin, every hormonal cascade in the human body is indexed to sunlight. Change the cycle, and you do not merely disrupt sleep, you begin to dismantle the temporal architecture of the self. It requires gravity, not as a convenience, as a biological necessity. The human skeleton, the cardiovascular system, the fluid distribution in the brain itself, all of it was designed under a gravitational load of 9.8 meters per second squared. Reduce that, and the body does not simply float, it degrades. Bone density dissolves, muscle atrophies, the optic nerve swells from fluid shifts, compressing the eye, distorting vision. The brain, quite literally, changes shape. And then there's the thing no one discusses in the press releases: the unconscious comfort of 8 billion other minds. Human beings are neurologically a collective organism. We evolved in groups. The presence of other humans, their faces, their voices, their breathing in adjacent rooms is not a social preference, it is a biological requirement. Mirror neurons do not exist to make us feel warm. They exist because the early human who could read the emotional state of the group had a survival advantage. The brain processes social isolation the same way it processes physical pain, the same neural pathways, the same distress signals. You are at this moment embedded in a web of approximately 8 billion nervous systems. You feel them around you even when you cannot see them. You feel them in the ambient noise of the city, the glow of screens in distant windows, the faint pressure of a populated world pressing back against your own existence. Now remove all of that. Remove the horizon. Remove the 24-hour sun. Remove gravity. Remove the social web of every human being who has ever lived. What is left? This is the question no recruitment video asks. This is the question the first Martian colonist will spend the rest of their life attempting to answer. The delusion that we can simply adapt to the void is not a scientific claim. It is a psychological defense mechanism. It is the brain confronted with the incomprehensible, generating a story it can survive. The story is comforting. The story is wrong. The transit to Mars takes between 6 and 9 months, depending on orbital mechanics. For the purposes of this document, we will call it what it is, a 400-day silence. In the first weeks, there is something that the astronaut corps has documented with cautious language and careful optimism. They call it the overview effect. From low Earth orbit, astronauts report a cognitive shift, a sudden overwhelming awareness of the Earth as a single, fragile, unified system. They look down at the continents, the cloud systems, the thin blue membrane of the atmosphere, and they feel, for perhaps the first time in their lives, the full weight of what they are leaving behind. It is described as transcendent, as beautiful. It is, in neurological terms, a grief response. The overview effect is the brain's attempt to memorize what it is losing. It is the same impulse that makes people look back at a house they are selling for the last time. The hyperactivation of the hippocampus, burning the image into long-term memory with unusual intensity, because some part of the brain understands, even before the conscious mind does, that this is a permanent departure. By month 2, the overview effect is gone. Earth is no longer a world. It is a blue pixel, then a white pixel. Then, as the spacecraft crosses the orbit of Mars for the first time on its long elliptical arc, it becomes indistinguishable from a moderately bright star. There is no precedent for what the human brain experiences when it loses its home planet from visual confirmation. We have studied sensory deprivation. We have studied extreme isolation. We have studied the psychology of submariners and Antarctic overwinter crews and solitary confinement prisoners. But none of those people looked out a window and watched their world shrink into nothing. None of them experienced the physical, visceral, irrefutable confirmation that they are now further from every human being who has ever lived than any human being has ever been. And then the umbilical cord is cut. At approximately 1.5 million kilometers from Earth, the communication delay becomes noticeable. Not yet catastrophic, a few seconds, but it grows. The further the spacecraft travels, the longer light takes to make the round trip. By the time the spacecraft is at the midpoint of its transit, the delay is between 8 and 12 minutes each way. A 20 to 24-minute round trip for a single message. Consider what this means, not technically, psychologically. You cannot have a conversation. You cannot call your mother. You cannot receive comfort in real time. You send a message, a compressed, data-efficient text, because bandwidth across interplanetary distances is a precious and rationed commodity. And then you wait. You wait for a response that by the time it arrives was sent by a person who was already in your past, a person reacting to a version of you that no longer exists. Communication becomes correspondence. Correspondence becomes a historical record. The voices of everyone you have ever loved begin to arrive like transmissions from a civilization that may or may not still exist. The spacecraft is not a vehicle. It is a sensory deprivation chamber traveling at 100,000 kilometers per hour. The interior volume of a proposed Mars transit habitat is approximately 60 to 100 cubic meters per person. The walls do not change. The view from the window, for the first 2 months a shrinking Earth, thereafter black, does not change. The smell does not change. The sounds do not change. The human brain requires novelty to function correctly. The hippocampus, which handles spatial navigation and memory consolidation, requires new environments to generate new cell growth. In a featureless, unchanging space, the hippocampus begins to atrophy. The astronaut's spatial memory degrades. Time perception collapses. Days become undifferentiated. The brain begins to lose the ability to distinguish between Tuesday and Friday, between morning and night. Cosmonauts on the International Space Station, which orbits at just 400 kilometers, close enough to feel the psychological gravity of Earth, report profound psychological disturbances after 6 months. Depression, irritability, emotional blunting, what they describe clinically as anhedonia, the inability to feel pleasure from activities that once provided it. The ISS is a day trip compared to what we are discussing. In the spacecraft heading for Mars, there is a person in a chair watching numbers on a screen tell them how far they are from the only planet that has ever hosted their kind. The numbers get larger every day. The numbers only get larger. The word habitat is doing a great deal of psychological work in the literature of Mars colonization. It implies a place where life thrives. It implies shelter, warmth, the possibility of flourishing. The word habitat belongs to the same rhetorical family as settlement and base and colony, words that reach back to a historical tradition of expansion, of humans arriving somewhere and making it theirs. Strip the language away. What is waiting on the surface of Mars for the first colonist is a pressurized metal cylinder, partly buried under Martian regolith for radiation shielding, connected by an airlock to other pressurized metal cylinders, also partly buried. The total habitable volume in the most optimistic current projections would be comparable to a small apartment, an apartment you can never leave. You can technically leave. You can put on a suit that weighs 130 kilograms in Earth gravity. You can move through an airlock procedure that takes 45 minutes. You can walk on the surface for a limited number of hours before your radiation dosage limits are reached, before consumables are depleted, before the system's margins begin to report too thin to ignore. But you cannot leave and survive. The surface of Mars will kill you in approximately 2 minutes without the suit. The atmospheric pressure is less than 1% of Earth's. Exposed blood will boil. Exposed tissue will freeze. The carbon dioxide atmosphere will deliver hypoxic blackout before you register discomfort. The habitat is not a new world. It is a submarine, buried in toxic dirt, on the floor of an alien ocean that contains no water, no life, no warmth, no frequency of any kind. And the submarine hums. This is one of the details that appears most frequently in the psychological literature on confined environment habitation, and it is one of the least discussed in public. The life support system, the oxygen generation, the carbon dioxide scrubbers, the water reclamation, the thermal regulation, runs continuously. It has to. Stop it for any significant period, and the colonist dies. It hums at a frequency that penetrates sleep, penetrates thought, penetrates the background of every moment of every day. After a period of weeks, the colonist stops consciously hearing it. This is not adaptation. This is the brain reclassifying a threat as environmental background. The auditory cortex makes a decision. This sound is constant. Therefore, it is not danger. Devote no further resources to monitoring it. But the limbic system, the older, deeper threat assessment architecture, does not entirely agree. At some level below conscious awareness, the sound continues to register as what it is. a machine that is the only thing standing between you and death. You cannot fully relax in a room where the walls are keeping you alive by mechanical effort. The light inside the habitat is artificial. The food is processed, reconstituted, or grown under artificial light in small hydroponic units. The walls are curved metal or composite. Every surface is manufactured, functional, deliberately chosen. There is no clutter that accrued over time, no texture that grew organically, no corner that formed by accident. The human brain evolved to process an environment of almost infinite textural and chromatic complexity. Forests, rivers, clouds, the random scattering of light through leaves, the unpredictable geometry of stone, the face of another human being changing, subtly, moment by moment, in response to an inner life you are constantly reading. In the habitat, there is nothing to read. Everything has already been read. Every surface has been processed and filed. The brain, finding no new input, begins to reprocess what it has, and then, when it has reprocessed that, it begins to generate input of its own. This is where the real psychological architecture begins to collapse. There is a condition documented in the psychology of extreme isolation that researchers have termed Solipsism Syndrome. It is not classified as a psychosis. It occupies a strange liminal territory between existential philosophy and clinical pathology. It describes the experience of a mind that has lost sufficient external verification to maintain confidence in the reality of the world outside itself. Consider the communication delay: 20 minutes each way, 40 minutes for the simplest exchange. To receive a response to the message you sent an hour ago is to receive a response from a world that has already moved on. The events being described occurred before the message was written. The person writing was reacting to a version of you from 40 minutes in the past, which means the conversation you are having is not a conversation. It is an exchange of historical documents, each sender a stranger to the world the other currently inhabits. Earth, for the first Martian colonist, is not a place that exists in the present. Earth exists only in the past, in recordings, in delayed dispatches, in memories. The colonist's present tense, the immediate, viscerally real, this is happening now, exists only inside the habitat, inside the suit, inside the skull. The brain, starved of external verification, begins to fill the gaps. Auditory hallucinations are documented extensively in extreme isolation environments. Voices, music, familiar sounds, the bark of a dog, the sound of rain, children playing. Sounds that the brain pulls from memory and represents as perception, not as memory, as perception. Happening now, real. Visual hallucinations follow a similar architecture. Peripheral motion, faces in surfaces, the sense of presence, the overwhelming, irrational, but neurologically real conviction that someone else is in the room. This is not madness in the colloquial sense. This is the brain doing exactly what it was designed to do. It was designed to generate a coherent model of reality using available data. When the available data is insufficient, it extrapolates. It fills the model with pattern-matched content from memory. It does this automatically, unconsciously, and with the same confidence it brings to genuine perception. There is a term used by researchers studying the phenomenology of isolation, the experience of self-dissolution, the gradual erosion of the boundary between what is self and what is world. In a rich, complex, populated environment, that boundary is constantly reinforced. Every interaction, every unexpected sight, every conversation that takes an unpredictable turn, all of it says implicitly, there is a world outside you, and it is different from you, and it is real. Remove those reinforcements, and the boundary becomes porous. Remove them completely, and the boundary disappears. The first Martian colonist will, in clinical terms, spend a significant portion of each day in a state that is functionally indistinguishable from the early stages of psychosis. Not because they are mentally weak, not because they were inadequately prepared, but because the human brain operated in an environment with no external verification of reality begins to generate its own. It has no other option. This is the biology of the void. This is what the application brochures do not mention. Mars is not a desert. The word desert implies something survivable. A desert has a floor. A desert has, in principle, resources, shade, buried water, creatures adapted to endurance. A desert is a place where the story of life has merely been paused. Mars is not a paused story. Mars is a sterilization chamber. Begin with the dust. Martian regolith, the term soil would imply biological activity, is loaded with perchlorates, chlorinated compounds that on Earth are classified as industrial contaminants. Perchlorates interfere with thyroid function. They suppress the production of thyroid hormones, disrupting metabolism, cognition, cardiac rhythm. At sufficient concentrations, they are acutely toxic. The Martian surface is, by percentage, substantially perchlorate contaminated, levels many thousands of times higher than safe human exposure limits on Earth. The dust is also physically a weapon. Unlike terrestrial dust, which has been tumbled by water and wind over geological timescales until its edges are rounded and smooth, Martian dust has never been processed by liquid water. The particles are sharp-edged, irregular, electrostatically charged. They cling to surfaces. They penetrate seals. They are, in aerodynamic terms, precisely the wrong size to be caught by the bronchial filtration system, fine enough to pass the upper airways, coarse enough to embed in the alveolar tissue of the lung. Breathe enough Martian dust, and you will develop a condition functionally similar to silicosis, progressive, irreversible scarring of the lung tissue. There is no cure. There is no reversal. The lungs become incrementally less capable of gas exchange. Then there is the radiation. Earth possesses a magnetosphere, a planetary-scale electromagnetic shield generated by the convection of its liquid iron outer core, which deflects the charged particle streams emitted by the sun. Without this shield, solar energetic particle events would reach the surface with enough energy to cause acute radiation sickness. Chronic exposure to galactic cosmic radiation, high-energy particles from outside the solar system, which no amount of solar shielding can fully stop, would, over years, meaningfully increase cancer risk and degrade neural tissue. Mars has no global magnetosphere. The Martian core cooled and solidified approximately 4 billion years ago, ending the convective process that generates a planetary magnetic field. The surface of Mars is, in terms of radiation exposure, between 10 and 20 times more irradiated than the surface of Earth. A year on Mars delivers a radiation dose that would, on Earth, require regulatory intervention for occupational exposure. Over years, and colonization is, by definition, a long-term commitment. The cumulative dose damages DNA, depletes bone marrow, clouds the ocular lens, and begins the slow, statistical process of inducing malignancy in susceptible tissues. The colonist's body is not conquering Mars. Mars is erasing the colonist's body. At the microscopic level, every system of human physiology is operating outside its designed parameters. Bone density continues to degrade in the reduced Martian gravity, which is 38% of Earth's, not enough to fully load the skeletal system, not enough for the osteoblast-osteoclast cycle to maintain structural integrity. The cardiovascular system, no longer required to pump blood against full terrestrial gravity, begins to remodel. The heart changes shape, cardiac output changes, the risk of arrhythmia increases. The muscles atrophy. Despite exercise regimens, despite resistance training, despite every pharmaceutical and mechanical intervention, the body that arrived on Mars is not the body that will inhabit Mars after 2 years of residence. It will be a diminished body, a body in the process of being slowly, systematically disassembled by an environment that does not recognize it as a category of thing that is permitted to exist. At some point in the near future, a human being will stand on the surface of Mars. And at that precise moment, a press release will be issued. It will use words like historic. It will use words like milestone. It will describe the person standing in the suit on the red surface as a representative of humanity's indomitable spirit. It will invoke, directly or by implication, the explorers of earlier centuries, the sailors, the mountaineers, the test pilots, as historical precedents for what is being witnessed. The cameras will cut to mission control. There will be people in chairs, weeping with their hands over their mouths. Let us deconstruct the mechanism behind that image. The first Mars landing, regardless of which entity executes it, will represent an expenditure of somewhere between $100 billion and $500 billion US. That figure is not exact because the true cost of any large-scale space program is distributed across decades of infrastructure, research, institutional salaries, and supply chains in ways that resist simple accounting. What we can say with precision is this: it is an incomprehensible sum. It is a sum that requires, for its political and financial justification, a commensurate narrative return. Data alone cannot provide that return. Scientific findings, however significant, do not move capital markets. They do not generate the political will necessary to sustain multi-decade funding commitments through electoral cycles and economic contractions. What moves capital is emotion. What generates political will is story. Specifically, a human being, alone, standing on an alien surface, representing something larger than themselves. The story of Mars requires a martyr figure. Not necessarily a person who dies, though the probability calculus on Mars colonization does not exclude that possibility. A martyr in the original sense, a witness, a body that bears the cost of the narrative so that the narrative can continue to be told. The human being in the suit is not primarily a scientist or an engineer or a pilot on the day they step onto the Martian surface. They are, on that day, a piece of symbolic content. They are the visual proof of concept for a value proposition that required $500 billion to produce. The private aerospace industry has been extraordinarily effective at translating this transaction into something that feels like meaning. The language of destiny. The language of species-level survival. the claim that humanity must become a multi-planetary species to ensure its long-term survival. A claim that is not scientifically unreasonable, but which is deployed in context primarily as a fundraising instrument. The astronaut who agrees to go to Mars has, in most cases, genuinely internalized this narrative. This is not cynicism directed at individuals. This is an observation about how ideological systems function. The person who volunteers for Mars believes they are making history. They are technically correct. What they may not have been given the analytical framework to recognize is that their belief, their willingness to sacrifice their psychological stability, their physical health, their connection to everything the human nervous system requires for baseline function, is the product being sold. Their sanity is the cost of goods. There is a clinical concept called institutional betrayal. It describes the specific psychological damage that occurs when an institution to which a person has committed themselves, in trust, in sacrifice, fails to acknowledge or take responsibility for the harm done to them in the service of that institution's goals. The institutional framework of Mars colonization has not yet had the opportunity to betray its first colonist. That transaction is pending. What we can observe in advance is that the psychological damage sustained by the first Martian colonist will be documented, studied, partially acknowledged, and then, because the program must continue, because the capital investment requires forward momentum, quietly reclassified as an acceptable operational cost. The colonist will be thanked. They will be celebrated. They will not be made whole. Because making them whole would require acknowledging what was taken from them. And the story cannot afford that acknowledgement. We will reach Mars. This is not a prediction made with enthusiasm. It is an observation about the trajectory of available technology, capital accumulation, and institutional momentum. The machinery is already in motion. The contracts have been issued. The engineers are working. The trajectory has been calculated. We will reach Mars. And a person, a biological organism descended from 400 million years of terrestrial evolution, carrying in their cells the chemical signatures of the ocean that first produced life, carrying in their neural architecture the deep structures of a creature that evolved on the African savanna, calibrated to a world of grassland and sun and the faces of its group. That person will step out of a metal cylinder onto a cold, irradiated, perchlorate-contaminated plane of red dust, and they will be alone in a way that has no precedent in the history of consciousness. Not alone as in isolated from other people, though they will be that. Not alone as in far from home, though they will be that. Alone in the way that a program is alone when it is running on hardware it was not written for. Alone in the way that an organ is alone when it is operating without the system it was designed to be part of. Alone in the way that a word is alone when it has been removed from its language. The colonist will look at the sky. It will be the wrong color. It will be a dull brownish pink at the horizon, fading toward a washed-out blue-black at the zenith, a sky that contains neither the wavelengths nor the optical depth that the human visual cortex expects from a sky. It will be wrong in a way that is very difficult to articulate and impossible to correct. They will not see stars from the surface during the day. Martian dust in the lower atmosphere scatters light in ways that occlude the fainter objects. The sky will be, in a fundamental sense, impoverished, containing less than what a sky is supposed to contain. The sun will be there, but smaller, about 40% smaller in angular diameter than the sun they grew up with, correct in position, correct in behavior, but diminished, as though the original had been replaced with an inferior copy. The first colonist will return to the habitat. They will cycle through the airlock. They will remove the suit. They will eat a meal that was manufactured on another planet and traveled for months in a cargo module. They will attempt to sleep under artificial light cycles timed to approximate a human circadian rhythm, while the habitat hums around them with the sound of the machinery that is keeping them alive. They will send a message to Earth. They will wait 20 minutes for the light carrying it to arrive. They will wait another 20 minutes for a response. In the 40 minutes between sending and receiving, they will exist in a present tense that no human has ever occupied, a present tense with no external verification, a present tense in which the only things confirmed real are the hum of the machinery, the weight of the suit left by the airlock, and the slowly returning sensation of their own heartbeat. They will be, in that moment, the most isolated conscious entity in the history of life on Earth, a designation that means nothing to the universe and everything to the one organism currently holding it. What they will feel in those 40 minutes, we cannot know. We can know the neurochemical framework, we can model the cortisol levels, the dopamine depletion, the altered sleep architecture, the beginning stages of hippocampal atrophy. We can describe the mechanism, but the experience, the actual first-person phenomenological content of being a human brain in that room, at that moment, waiting for a signal from a world 300 million kilometers away, that experience has never existed before. It will be, in the strictest sense, a new category of human experience. Not exploration, not heroism, not adventure, something for which we do not yet have a word, something the colonist will have to name from the inside, alone, in real time, with no dictionary for the territory they are inhabiting. We will reach Mars. The person who arrives will carry every evolutionary inheritance that makes them human. They will carry the need for a horizon, for a sun, for a social web, for the unconscious comfort of a world that was built for them and around them over hundreds of millions of years. They will carry all of this, and Mars will receive it with complete indifference. Somewhere on the surface, the red dust is settling. It settles constantly. It has been settling for 3 billion years. It settled before there were eyes to see it. It will settle long after the last mechanical hum of the last habitat has gone silent. The dust does not record the presence of what moves through it. It does not record anything at all. It simply settles and waits. And the silence beneath it is not the silence of something that has been lost. It is the silence of something that was never there.